Good morning, viewers. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Vibhuti Jha. It's a distinct pleasure to be with you on this particular long weekend, and I'm sure you all have had a great Thanksgiving holiday break for everybody. So today what we are going to discuss is, as we always say, we go deep into an issue, understand the impact and implication of it all. Today we are going to focus on immigration. Immigration, is critical for all of us because we are all immigrants and we still know people who want to come to America. There's one very interesting statistics about the dialogue on immigration which is going on in a rather intense manner. Ever since I came to this country in '91, I have been hearing the phrase comprehensive immigration reform. It has not yet happened. There must be something crazy about it that is still the issue is not fixed in as many years since 1991. This conversation is going on. So what is it about immigration that can't be fixed? The second point which I find is very interesting, that United States, taking India as a perspective, has 1/4 the population of India, is 3 times larger than India, is a remarkably resource-rich country. It needs people. This country has been made by immigrants, and still there is a major battle cry going on about who to come, who must not come, or does this country have an unfettered authority to bring anyone and everyone? What is the point at which there is a need for shift in regulations? So these are all issues we will talk about, and to discuss this matter with us today, I have great pleasure in inviting Sam Udani. Sam,
delighted to be
the
here,
program.
Sir. Delighted.
And Sam has been here before, just before the EB-5 immigration program was undergoing revision, and we inspired people to make early and timely investments as well as their application. Now, EB-5 remains a very important subject, because this, in my opinion, is as yet the fastest way to gain permanent residency in the United States for those who can make the investment. EB-5 regulations have just been changed. It was established in 1991. For the last 4 or 5 years, everybody has been talking about that amounts will change, figures will change, regulations will change, but it didn't happen. The can got kicked forward every 6 months or so. But this time it has happened. And let's talk about understanding what are the new regulations it has happened. When I went to India 3 to 4 years ago to find out why are Indians not taking advantage of EB-5, I found there was hardly any awareness about this program. A lot of people didn't even know about it. And so consequently, when we made the inroads, India became the market after Chinese retrogression set in, and India became the second big market. And Sam is very aware. He has done global seminars on this item. So Sam, educate our people, our audience, as to the shift that has happened, key areas of shift that has happened in the new regulation in terms of amount of investment. And we will discuss each one of them, but also would like to know, how does it affect getting the green card? Because in the previous dispensation, one could hopefully get the green card in anywhere up to 2 or slightly above, more time than that. In one of our cases, the person got approval in 7 months. So we are not talking about exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking that. And let's talk about these two, and then we'll go over to the other subject matters.
Sure. So there are 3 specific points that you touched on. One is the new regulation. What does it change in a nutshell? 2 is the overall timeline, which of course is, as you mentioned, the shortest sort of marrying a US citizen is really the shortest way for most people. Thirdly, the consequences of the new regulation. The consequences are enormous, much more than what meets the eye. So I'll touch upon each one of this in about 20 seconds each.
Sure.
So in terms of the new regulation, it changes 2 things. One, it changes many things, but 2 are the most critical items. One, is that the investment amounts are raised from the 500,000 level to the 900,000 level, and the $1 million level to the $1.8 million level. So that's the first change. The second change is that the location of the investment, where the money could go in for job creating activity, has been redefined. They can go either in what is a truly rural area, which means less than 20,000 people living in that jurisdiction, or in a high unemployment urban area. So if the population is more than 20,000 in that jurisdiction, then it must be within a census tract of very high unemployment. So that's the first change, that's the regulation itself. In terms of timing, it depends on which country you're from. I mean, if you're from China, you're looking at an enormous wait of time. The US Department of State estimates that time to be somewhere around 16 years. If you're from Vietnam, the Department of State estimate is approximately 9 years, and if you're from India, their latest estimates have come down to approximately 5 years and change. But those estimates are subject to change and have frequently been inaccurate, but nevertheless, that's what we have. Every other country has no waiting period other than the unfortunately very long USCIS processing time, which could be 2 years or perhaps sometimes more. But that's in terms of time. Finally, of course, there is a tremendous amount of consequences, which I'm hoping that, as we explore that area, we can look at all the various impacts of the new regulation.
Brilliant. What is also important for people to know, like everybody is now has some conception of the concept of EB5, investor visa. Everybody knows investor visa. Even if they don't know EB5 nomenclature, they know investor visa. And both of us have worked a lot in this domain. What is the immediate impact of this enhanced amount? That is important because from the Indian point of view, which is what our expertise is all about, the Reserve Bank of India and the government allows every individual to invest 250,000 per person every year. So it was very easy to fit the 500,000 requirement as a family investment. It was possible to do so. With the 900,000 and 1.8 coming in, that thing will become tougher in terms of internal regulations as to how can they transfer the money, and what if any new methods, that source of fund verification, has that been a change as to what is required in this direction?
All right, so first let's look at path of funds, which is what you allude to when you talk about the Reserve Bank of India and their controls over foreign remittances from India. And then also let's look at the source of funds, which is a completely different story. But path of funds, I think, is more important from what you raised. So let's talk about that, because that definitely gets affected. So I'm going to handle it in three different parts. So the first point is that I'm no expert on the Reserve Bank of India regulations, but I can tell you that Reserve Bank of India absolutely is aware of the fact that EB5 exists, and there was a circular that was released in January of this year, and which the banks have been implementing faithfully, which they have to. It's an instruction from the Reserve Bank of India. So one should bear in mind that we should keep in that there may be changes in the future. But NREs and NRO accounts to some extent are not affected because you have a higher limit, a higher cutoff limit. So we're looking at regular Indian accounts which get affected. Now, the Indian fiscal year is March 31st/April 1st. So if 450,000 were wired out through a husband and wife on March 31st, another 450 on April 1st, then by bridging the fiscal years, you can still thread the needle.
True.
And we're in November, so that may be a feasible option for many people. Now, finally, the worst case scenario, if let's say you're sitting here in May or you're sitting here in November and you want to make an effective investment in a very short time, you don't have time to do two different fiscal years. From what I understand, it is not against the law to involve your brother, sister, their families in achieving the results. So in Vietnam and China and other countries like that, the cutoff limits are as low as $10,000 per year. So they actually set up these giant collections of people who go around and make the investment. So I think in terms of path of funds, it'll just get a little bit more complicated, but I don't think if we have reached a point where it's a barrier or an insuperable barrier to getting an EB5 investment effected. Source of funds is a different story, of course. With 900,000, there's a lot more vetting to do. It's always been the Achilles heel in every country. Source of funds is always the problem. There's a lot of people with money in most countries, but not that many people whose source of the money is to USCIS's satisfaction.
No, the other part also which is important, and you are right, source of funds and path of funds are two different things. The path is clear. I mean, it is absolutely clear that if you want to take advantage of it, this enhanced amount, make some investments now and some in after the fiscal year is over, you can take advantage of that. That's number one. Number two is the verification of source of funds. So this is a program, is those who can afford it. If you have the ability to afford $1 million investment, you definitely have to be more than accredited investor, and you have to have businesses or income that supports it one way or the other. So I particularly feel that yes, the source of funds vetting will be relatively easier insofar as I'm concerned.
Wow, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
I am looking at
it. It's counterintuitive, but it makes sense.
It is going to be relatively easier compared to the earlier dispensation when people had bag full of cash, who had cash income, and they were trying to convert that cash into a dollar investment.
Well, that's a very practical way of looking at it.
That is the way we look at, and you know, when you target a market where people have decidedly $1 million plus with them to make that investment for the welfare of the children or family, I think that will be easier. We are looking at from that point of view.
Sure.
Is that this could be a much easier way to do that, except the fiscal thing has to be handled. And the second part, bear in mind that there are always friends, family members who are in the United States, for those living in India, and they can take loans and take, you know, contributions or gifts from them to facilitate the process. Coming to that, the third part is very important, is that has this change affected the people, you know, the projects that are existing within the country, and how the investor needs to worry about it, and how do they take into account that what project is good and what is not?
Well, I mean, the project being good or not is of course an individual decision, and it's best taken by each person because everyone's perception of risk is different, and with proper guidance from licensed professionals. But what I was thinking is that of course it's a new world. It's a new world, it's new regulations. It's the first time that the regulations have been changed since this program was instituted. The original regulations were written back in 1993, as far as I recall. So it's been more than 25 years, and now we have a change. So perhaps maybe what I could do is to go through some of the impact of all those changes, and allude to the points that you mentioned in terms of how do they affect projects which are in existence, what does it mean for new projects. If that's okay, then I can.
Yes, sure,
okay.
Absolutely.
So let's begin with in terms of the projects. So essentially, it's a new market. It's a smaller market, as best as I can see. The number of projects is down by 75% because many of the others don't qualify under the new regulations. The number of investors.
Now, before you jump to that,
sure.
If you are saying that their 75% projects are down.
Yes, they're gone.
What happens to the investors who are already part of that?
Oh, there's absolutely no problem because the projects continue. They're just not in the primary market. They're now in the secondary market. Right? It's just like, let's say, a big company in India, let's say ICICI issued some stock in the capital markets, right? And then later on they decided for the next 5 years they will not be issuing any stock. Doesn't mean ICICI stock is not listed. It's still there. It's still a good company. But it's just that they're not issuing any new stock anymore. So it's the difference between primary and secondary market, right? So all the projects, you know.
So from the layman's point of view,
yes,
those projects are no longer available for investment.
That's exactly right.
So because when we say that 75% projects are gone, they are gone from the circulation.
Correct. They're gone from a point of view of being available to you as an opportunity to invest.
Investor, because he will get worried if he...
No, the buildings are very much there. The buildings are doing fine. They're going up. There are tenants there. They're paying their rent. They're generating profits. I mean, it's certainly not true that those 75% of the buildings have disappeared. I mean, that is certainly not true. Okay? It's just that those buildings are no longer eligible for getting new EB-5 capital under the new regulations, right? That's a very important point. I'm glad you clarified that. But the number of investors is also potentially down by about 75%. And the reason it's down is very simple, is because you know, whenever you raise the price of something, you're bound to lose demand. And when you raise the price of something by 80%, it's not unreasonable to believe that the demand will fall by some amount. It's hard to say exactly how much. I'm estimating about 75%. Now, what remains is still significant. It's $1 billion market. This is not a small market. It's a nice little niche market and with a lot of players in it, right? But the old players are gone. So, the big developers in urban areas, in Miami, in Los Angeles, in New York, the ones who were the biggest names in EB5, no longer qualify under the new regulation at the $900,000 amount.
And why would that be?
Okay, so the key change is location. That is the big change in the regulation. There are only 2 locations which are permitted now for EB5 investment at the lower level, at the $900,000 level, instead of the $1.8 million level. And those 2 locations are either a rural area, which is defined as anything with less than 20,000 in that jurisdiction, so truly rural, or if it is in a jurisdiction with over 20,000 population, then it should be in a census tract, a very small defined area of very high unemployment, 150% of national average. Right? So those 2 areas are typically not the kinds of areas that would sustain an 80-story skyscraper, whether it's an office tower, a hotel, an apartment building. Those kinds of very dense developments tend to occur in very affluent census tracts, very affluent areas of the country, and very tightly packed areas of the country in urban areas. So by both the new definitions, those old players are gone. Okay, from this market, and they may be gone permanently unless there is legislative change. So that's the new locations. The old players gone. The smaller markets still exist. There are still 2 more issues to consider. One is that under these new locations, my suspicion is that there will be a couple of asset classes that will make it.
Let's do one thing.
Yes.
Due to time constraints, we'll
Sure.
take a short break and we will be back to continue the thread exactly where you have stopped with the new asset classes and the other category that we talked about, okay?
Certainly.
Stay tuned for this conversation to follow right after this short break. Welcome back. Continuing our conversation on EB5 immigration program, as you may have recognized that this is perhaps the most speedy green card or speedy green card and permanent residency approach to United States now. So we will discuss right now the 2 more issues about the asset classes that are coming up under the new provision, the possibility of, and how different is the Indian marketplace in relation to 2 subjects. One is Indians in America and Indians in India who want to become the permanent resident of the US. So Sam, get going with the new asset class.
Sure.
That could emerge out of this entire possibility.
Certainly, Vibhuti Ji. The old asset classes were primarily real estate, something in the vicinity of 90% or more, 95% was real estate. And it was a variety of different projects, on the same theme, large towers. There's buildings with hotels, buildings with apartments, buildings with offices. It's still large buildings. Under these new rules, of course, we have to see what the market says, but my guess is that there are 3 completely new asset classes which are going to dominate the new EB5 market. One is retail. The reasoning is very simple. Retail generates a lot of jobs in America. Retail can be, a small retail store, a 7-Eleven, for example, can be placed even in a urban TEA with high unemployment. Just because somebody has high unemployment doesn't mean that they do not buy candy or chewing gum. So retail is something that lends itself to the new definition. Manufacturing is another. Manufacturing usually consumes an enormous amount of space and is therefore found in places which are typically defined by USCIS as rural. You see, so we don't tend to think of manufacturing as a rural industry because it is not, but by the USCIS's definition, manufacturing would often fit in, especially if they need a lot of space, in places which they think are rural. So manufacturing, I think, is going to make a comeback. And finally, assisted living. Okay, assisted living also tends to have a large number of jobs. It is required all over the country. Our country is aging. America is aging every year. So there's literally tens of thousands of assisted living facilities across the country, and new ones are getting built all the time. They're getting built in every area: urban area, rural area, high employment area, high unemployment area. Everyone is getting old.
True.
Right? So the assisted living, I think, would be another asset class that makes it. So this is a very different market than what it used to look like.
And I'm happy to hear that about assisted living thing, because what we have been approached by several assisted living entities who are trying to set up to support them in their EB5 raise. And we are, as we have always believed in, is that if we have to make the project self-sustaining to begin with, and then you plug in the EB5 funding requirement in it to see how much we can live with and how much we need definitely to support the cause. And if by God's grace or God forbid, if EB5 program is abandoned tomorrow or cancelled by the government, the project can become successful on its own. But you will be very happy to know that we have a project which is in manufacturing. So we have been forward-looking in our approach.
Amazing.
So we have a manufacturing concern which has an exemplar status and everything else. So people who are interested must talk about this, and we need to bring this to the notice of Indians, because it was almost surprising that how Indians were not even aware. I have been told by people, if this is the case, if only $500,000 investment is required, there are many people who will walk in, take their option. But do tell us about how it impacts Indians living in India and Indians in India. So that is a very interesting scenario here.
Sure. So, many people tend to think of themselves as Indians, regardless of which country they are in America or in India. But there are some practical differences in American immigration law. And I'll explore them in a little bit of detail, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because I think it'll help people see that there is and it's true only for India, by the way. It's not true for China, Vietnam, and other countries, because in those countries, if you look at historically people coming from all EB5 countries except India, what has happened is that more than 90%, perhaps more than 95% of the beneficiaries of EB5 visas have come directly with a green card into America. They have not been living and working here. Unlike the Indians, there are some who come directly with the green card, and then there are some who are already here in America and are living here with their families on H-1B visas typically, right? So therefore, there have been two real EB5 beneficiaries from the Indian market, Indians in India, Indians in America. And under American immigration law, there is a slight difference in terms of the benefits that they get, and more importantly, in terms of the speed of the benefits that they get. So let me explain. In order to get a green card, there are two basic paths. Either you can consular process, or you can adjust status. Consular process means you go to an American embassy, Delhi for example, and say, please give me my green card. And then your family enters with a green card. Alternatively, if you are living in America on an H-1B visa, you already have status. It's called H-1B status, right? And you are adjusting the status to permanent resident, which is a green card. So you adjust status. So there are two different pathways, right? And because there are two different pathways, it leads to a completely different way of looking at the benefits of a green card. If you are doing the consular processing, it means if you're living in India, you have to wait for what is called a final action date, which is published by the State Department in its visa bulletin every month. That final action date could be, the forecast of the State Department is many, many years, 4 or 5 years. So you're looking at a significant wait. On the other hand, if you're living in America, there is a second column which is important to you, which is called filing date. Filing date, at the moment, as best as I know, is current, which means there is no wait at all, right? So it means if you have an approved 526, your EB5 petition was approved, you can do two things while you still wait for your green card. The green card that you get will be at the same time as your friend in India. It's no difference between the friend in America and a friend in India. But you can do two things in America which you can't do in India if you're here on H-1B status and your final action date, and your filing date is current. One, you can file a form I-131, and two, you can file a form I-765. What does that mean? The 765 form gives you an employment authorization document, an EAD. Once you have your EAD, you no longer need an H-1B visa. You can work for anyone you please. You can work for as many people as you please. You can work for any kind of occupation. You can just stay at home if you want, right? None of those are possible under the H-1B, right? Second, the I-131 gets you advanced parole. What does that mean? It means you can go from here, from America, to India to visit your parents or family, and then you can come back without seeing the consulate in Bombay or Chennai or Delhi.
Right.
You know, that's a pretty big advantage, because we know those folks at those consulates sometimes can be, you know, very difficult to deal with. They don't understand much of the concepts and context of people's lives, and sometimes they take hasty decisions which are not consistent with the facts. So that is a major advantage. So that's why what the change that has happened, as we see in the market, is that it used to be 50-50, approximately. Both the Indians in India, Indians in America were about half-half. As best as I can tell under the new regulations, the Indians in America is going to be 70% and 30% Indians in India. So the proportion of the Indians in America is going to go up under the new regulation.
The other, related to this subject matter is the fact that there was a lot of, because of the backlog in H-1B to green card was huge.
Oh yes, enormous,
Even
many
EB
decades.
Yes.
Yes.
EB1, EB2, EB3, everything is blocked up.
Correct.
For Indians especially.
That's right, absolutely.
And as a result of which, people have been trying to move from H1 to EB5. One of the experiences that we had, you know, and we attended some of your seminars, and you have been doing a whole lot of them, is that not everybody had the investable surplus, as I call it. They were here on H-1B salary, they were here for 5 years, 10 years. None of them could really generate investable surplus of $500,000. But some of them did have ancestral properties back home that was taking time to convert, because they had to go through the entire family separation to get their part of the share. So there is a scenario here. So how do you expect that, you know, what percentage of H-1B people living in America really be able to take advantage of the enhanced amount?
Oh, sure.
Will they automatically disqualify because arranging the funds is difficult?
Sure.
Might as well live for another 15 years for where it is.
No, it's not 15. It's
Whatever.
way more. It's
exactly.
50 years or 100 years. It's an enormous way. There is no practical EB2, EB3 path left for Indians anymore.
And what is important, sorry to interrupt
Sure,
here,
no problem.
but we are, so, what is important here is that apparently a lot of H-1B people are being asked to leave. And some of them are getting some consideration on H-1B. They go to India, from there they get the stamp, then it's held on administrative reasons.
Right.
Now that's one clause nobody understands. What is the administrative thing? And everybody says it is just harassment. Your thought?
Well, firstly, there's been some research done on denials of H-1Bs, not just the harassment. Harassment is unfortunately widespread, but denials are much more serious than that, and the denials are enormous. The percentage in the first year of the Trump administration, where the policies and the procedures were still the Obama-era procedures and policies, they had not trickled down to the level of H-1Bs yet. The total denials was, I believe the most recent report said 6%. Today, the best analysis we have for the last 12 months is 24%. It's increased 4 times. That's an enormous denial rate, and that's true for very large companies, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, Microsoft. I mean, no matter what you do, even these companies are seeing very large denial rates. So it's a bleak scenario for H-1Bs, and this is another reason why many people from H-1B want the certainty of a green card so they're not subject to this. Now, unfortunately, it's a very small number. In the old days, our estimate was 2%. Only 2% of H-1Bs could afford the money. I would say today it's probably less than 1%, right? So it's a very small number. But bear in mind, first of all, there's nothing wrong with someone who is advantaged by ancestral property or through working with a wonderful startup which gave them a tremendous amount of stock options. There's nothing wrong with them benefiting from what they've done. Yeah. But I would say that there is another advantage for all the others who do not have the advantage of money. That 1% or 2% is out of the system of the EB2 and EB3. So everybody else goes forward by 1 or 2% faster.
Right, okay.
So in that sense, it's a win-win. It's not a win-lose.
That's a very interesting way to define that part of it. But the issue still remains.
Yeah.
And the issue remains is that at this moment, it appears that those who can afford, EB5 remains the best option to have an expeditious green card and permanent residency in this country. Will that be fair enough to say so?
I would say that if you don't have a marriage to a U.S. citizen, I mean bona fide real marriage, I'm not talking about
Right.
No one should even consider anything else.
Right.
I think it's a very bad idea
Yeah.
to think of getting married to someone for just for a green card. That's ridiculous. But if your heart has set you in a position where you have someone in your life whom you love so much and they are a U.S. citizen, then certainly that is the fastest way. I mean, I don't think there is any doubt about that.
Right.
But short of that, I would say that EB-5 for most folks from India who don't have that many kith and kin here is really the fastest way, despite the fact that it's been taking longer and longer due to the fact that many Indians have been applying. Right? But despite that, it remains the fastest way. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I just received a WhatsApp message. Somebody definitely is watching the program.
Oh my!
Yeah, and the question is relating to, is there any chance of the 10,000 number going up? Or related to that is, any commitment to decrease the time of processing?
You mean time to get a green card
Yeah,
or to process it?
Process I-526.
Oh, to process I-526, look, USCIS is really, 2 years, 3 years, that's ridiculous. I mean, I can't imagine why it takes that long, and I don't think many other people could imagine why it takes that long. Very recently, just as of 2-3 years ago, it used to take not even half that time, not even a quarter of that time. So I think USCIS processing times do need to be brought under control, and it's a question of finding the will in the administration at the proper levels to make it happen. At the moment, in the Department of Homeland Security, the focus is on border enforcement, the focus is on interior enforcement, the focus is on redefining asylum eligibility. It's not on benefits processing. So there is no push to reduce it at the time being in this administration. Now, after the election of November 2020, there could be a new president, or there could be a re-election of Mr. Trump, and there may be new priorities at that time. So it could change then, but I don't foresee a change in 2020 in terms of processing times. Now, you had another question you asked was about, I'm sorry, I lost my track.
That question was,
oh yes, about the
allocation from 10,000 to...
Right, that was a 10,000 number. There's a lot of people trying to do that. There's a number of bills in Congress that have been introduced over the years, including one currently by Senator Rounds of South Dakota, Senator Graham of South Carolina, and Senator Cornyn of Texas have introduced a bill to at least open the door to some kind of quota relief and to get some more numbers for EB-5, and that would be something that a lot of people would welcome. I mean, as immigration politics go in America, this is a very, very, very low priority from Congress's point of view. Congress is looking at the big picture. They're looking at immigration enforcement on the border. There's been from time to time, both under President Obama and under President Trump, a crisis situation for which they were compelled to take extraordinary actions. And they're concerned about the dreamers, the folks who have come to America simply because they obeyed their moms and dads when they were little. And for no fault of their own, they find themselves stateless, essentially. True. So these are the big issues, these two big issues, enforcement and benefits, that Congress is looking at. And until those are resolved, I see very little chance of quota relief.
Okay. The other part, when we talked about why does it take so long to process the application, and my understanding of the situation was that people who are processing these applications at USCIS, they are all receiving hundreds and varieties of cases where the source of funds verification from different countries. Now, these people have not traveled abroad to know the actual conditions of how life sustains itself in that part of the world. So if the application is submitted with the understanding to make it easier for the processor to follow the route in which the money has flown, they understand better. If you have just submitted the documents for them to play around with it and understand, it takes much, much longer because they have to configure how the whole thing was arrived at, which includes land records which are in local languages in India, in Gujarati or Kannada or whatever. We provide an authenticated document translated in that so that they understand. Nobody reads that. But the issue is that it has to be submitted. And because it's not to blame them, but it's just the nature of the beast. If you are seeing an application from Thailand, from Vietnam, from China, from India, they all reflect different scenarios. Stay tuned, we will be talking about some very interesting issues that are emerging in the immigration arena right after this short break. Welcome back. We are having a very exciting conversation on immigration, which is what we all Indians are in this country. People at one time, I remember when I was a very junior new officer in Reserve Bank of India. So at that time, I found one person who came to me in Bangalore office where I was working. He had immigrant visa for himself. He had a citizenship. His grandfather, his grandmother, uncle, aunts, the whole clan was coming here. And now we know the process has changed. Mr. Trump is trying to not stop immigration. He wants to bring about some sense in immigration, in my opinion, because instead of it becoming come one, come all, now having a very prosperous economy and people want to take part in it, he's trying to streamline. That's what I think. Political slinging the ball is not something which I'm interested in here. But there are a lot of interesting things are happening in the domain of immigration under Mr. Trump and its future implication. Share with us some of the things, because you publish a wonderful journal called ILW. You are a journalist.
Immigration Daily is the name of a publication.
Yeah. ILW. So share with us if there is any strategic shift happening insofar as immigration is concerned, which may not be a law, but a conversation always begins an action. Sure.
So let me just make a brief comment on the background, and then we'll jump into the specifics.
Sure.
There's a lot happening in immigration. Mr. Trump's administration has been very clear that they want the quantity of immigrants in the United States to be reduced. And that stands in contrast to many other people in American politics, both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, who say that the immigrants should be increased. Today, for example, Mayor Bloomberg, a former mayor of New York, running for the Democratic nomination to the President of the United States, has said in a speech a few hours ago that he wants to see more immigrants come to America, not fewer. So there is a difference in vision, more or fewer, right? Mr. Trump's vision is fewer, and there are some other people who say more. Now, this vision of fewer in the early years of the Trump administration was done through policy memoranda. And we saw many of those. There was that so-called Muslim ban, for example, and there were many other initiatives of the Trump administration to follow the path of fewer immigrants. The court stepped in many of those instances. The Muslim ban, in large part, in modified part, was approved by the Supreme Court as lawful. But there were many others that were struck down both by the Supreme Court and by the lesser circuit courts and district courts. And the Trump administration has suffered a series of reversals on that. So they've decided, which is clear now, to do it on a more sounder legal footing, which is much harder to challenge in court, and much more important, is going to outlive just this administration. Whether Mr. Trump stays or not after November 20, the changes that are being contemplated now at the Department of Homeland Security will stay after November 20 because they'll be codified in the Federal Register, in the Code of Federal Regulations.
November 2020.
2020.
Yeah.
November 2020. I apologize. I'm using the short form. Thank you for clarifying. November 2020. Okay, 1 year from now, approximately. So they have published, the Department of Homeland Security, just a few days ago, in the Federal Register, a semi-annual unified agenda. Now, what that means is that every department of the United States, Department of Veteran Affairs, Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, every one of them publishes twice a year their vision of what regulations they are contemplating, what changes that they seek to bring. And the Department of Homeland Security has just released a sweeping set of ideas. As you say, a law begins with a conversation, and that is exactly the case here. The semi-annual unified agenda is supposed to be a forum to start such a conversation. So there are 5 areas which I thought might be of interest to folks from India. And if it's okay with you, I'll just go through them.
Please do that.
In about
Please
a minute each. Yeah. The first one is H-1Bs. There is a determined effort to exclude computer programmers from being eligible for H-1Bs. Exclude. Now you must bear in mind that that is in fact not only the most popular occupation category for Indians getting H-1Bs, but it is in general for anywhere in the world the number one occupational category. Now bear in mind they're not trying to exclude software engineers or necessarily systems analysts or program analysts. They're looking for particularly at computer programmers. There is a document published, it's a book, it's available in print form or it's online for free by the Department of Labor. Every year, I believe, it's called the Occupational Outlook Handbook, OOH. And you can Google it and find it pretty quickly. That lists every occupation and its customary requirements in the American economy. And as we all know, many computer programmers in America do not necessarily have a bachelor's degree. So those with master's degrees and those who are getting H1s should be all right. But those who are looking at bachelor's degrees and are seeking to be computer programmers, the OOH says, truthfully, reflecting a fact in American society, that often employers will hire someone with an associate's degree. So they're saying, well, if that's the case, because it does not necessarily require an H-1B degree, a bachelor's degree, it is not eligible to be classified as an H-1B occupation. So that's something that is in the process of rulemaking by the Trump administration. The second one is H-4EADs. Many, many hundreds of thousands of spouses in America of principal applicants who are H-1Bs have employment authorization documents, EADs, through their H-4 status. The Trump administration has made no secret of its desire to get rid of H-4 EADs. They attempted to do that last year and there were political maneuverings which prevented that from happening, but they have just now reaffirmed their desire to eliminate H-4 EADs. That's number two. Number three, the F-1 visa, the student visa in the United States, very popular route for many people from India to come to America, is going to see several changes potentially. Again, these are all at the stage of regulations being made at this point, so they're not law at this point, but this is what the Trump administration would like to see. One, the definition of OPT, optional practical training, they'd like to narrow it, so make it harder for people to obtain work after finishing their F1 period in their schools. Two, to become involved in regulating the DSOs, the officers inside each university who have access to the CVIS system, who monitor the status of each and every foreign student. They are going to get more deeply involved and not let the university just hire or fire anyone they please, and they want to get involved in that. And number three, universities have always had a bit of discretion when somebody was trying to, let's say, move from University A to University B and innocently had a small gap of a week or two where they did not have proper status. The universities had some discretion to overlook that and bring them back into status. And that is becoming, according to the Trump administration's intended regulation, it's going to become difficult. And finally, F1 visas have usually been DS. DS means duration of status, which means you can come in for a bachelor's degree, you can change your mind, go ahead and get a master's after that, and then after you finish that, you want to still do a PhD, you could do that. So you could continue to extend F1 status so long as the school certified that you were engaged in a educational program in their curriculum, taking the requisite number of courses and credits in that school. And now they're seeking, under the regulation, to eliminate DS and specify specific dates, which would make it much more cumbersome and much more tightly, rigid in terms of its application. So that's the third change. The fourth one and fifth I will allude to very quickly. Everyone in America who applies for an immigration benefit for a family member fills out a form called an I-864, which is the affidavit of support. And the Trump administration continues to make that document tighter and tighter and make it more and more narrower in terms of who can qualify to fill out an I-864 for an immigrant beneficiary. And finally, asylum, which affects some people from India, is under ongoing change and review. The Trump administration has clamped down a lot on the procedures and policies affecting asylum, and they now want to codify some of them into regulation. So this is a pretty significant, and its impact on the Indian community in America is going to be also significant.
The question that I have in mind and is looking at it from the perspective that when the departments initiate their strategic conversations about what to do in the future, so these play into that. But given the fact that elections are coming in 1 year time and the campaigning is going big time, and Democratic Party has a remarkably liberal stand on immigration, and do you think Trump is reasonable in trying to streamline the whole process, because you can't have unfettered people coming in. So is it an attempt to make sure that people who come here are the kind of people that we need? That's important, because give me your poor, give me your hungry was a great slogan and great invitation for people to come 200 years ago. Today, that may or may not work, because your need has changed. Look at the college admissions and cost of college here. It is horrendously expensive. That's another discussion that we can have forever. But more and more people are looking at higher education because there are no jobs available at the lower level, because manufacturing disappeared from here under the various bilateral treaties that the United States did. Manufacturing disappeared. Service jobs went overseas. There was a cry against India was hijacking American jobs. But today, United States has super employment rate right now. So what happened to that conversation? But these take time for it to happen. How many of these will eventually get into rules? We do not know, because it is as much a partisan issue as much it ought to be a bipartisan concern. So given that scenario, I feel that these discussions are important, because you do not know which of the 5 will get into play. And I think the student one and the duration of stay, that may happen faster or may not, because US needs qualified students. They need talent. So this may get delayed, but H401 elimination and computer programmers coming here, that might happen very quickly. Now, like every conversation, this conversation has to come to an end. So Sam, thank you very much for coming today.
Delighted.
Really appreciate that you came and clarified so many issues on the immigration front. Thank you, viewers. Continue to enjoy your little break that you have. Back to work on Monday. See you later. See you next week. Thank you.